Jim Gramm here for Beyond the Cage, going live for another broadcast. Once again, I'm your host, Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm, and you can also like Beyond the Cage on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast, as well as subscribe to the show on YouTube, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast, and of course catch up audio-wise on iTunes and Google Play. On today's show, going to recap UFC Oklahoma City as well as Bellator NYC / Bellator 180, the pay-per-view as well as Spike TV event that happened last weekend as well. And if you have any questions or comments or concerns, please type in the chat and I will answer them kind of as they come up, whether it's just about MMA in general or, of course, the two events I'll be talking about, Bellator NYC and UFC Oklahoma City. But starting first with the event that happened first, that's going to be Bellator. And overall, I thought Bellator was a very solid event. It was a little weird, I think, in terms of the pacing of the fights, I think were rather odd. You were supposed to have 5 fights ended up being on the streaming portion of the card that was on the Spike TV app and website, highlighted by Ryan Couture with a unanimous decision victory over Haim Ghazali, if I said that correctly. But before that fight, 4 straight finishes, pretty excellent. Hugh McKenna defeated John Salgado. That was via Kimura. That was like in less than a minute. Then Matt Rizzo took on Sergio Da Silva. That was a heck of a fight between those two. Ended up winning for Rizzo by arm triangle choke in the 3rd round. And then Anthony Galeno and Jerome Mickle was an excellent fight. Ended up that one being a 3rd round submission with Anthony Giacchina, if I said that correctly, getting the win. And then, Bradley DeSer just blasting his way through Nate Greb, defeating him in the 1st round via knockout at 2:54 inside the 1st round there. And of course, the aforementioned Ryan Couture getting the victory there. So that's what started off. So all that was rolling up pretty smoothly. And then we get to the Spike TV portion of the card, or I guess Bellator 180, however you want to work that out at that point. We were actually supposed to see 4 fights, ended up only seeing 3. Started off with Heather Hardy against Alice Yeager. Heather Hardy, a world champion boxer, making her debut not just in Bellator, but in mixed martial arts as well, taking on Alice Yeager, who's been around for a while. Had a record of 4-5 coming into the fight. Had been fighting for a few years. I'll admit on this very show, I did pick Alice Yeager to win. I was wrong. I thought the experience of the 9 fights and being more of an MMA fighter would help Yeager. But however, taken, her age being 38, even though Heather Hardy isn't a spring chicken herself at 35, but obviously had fought as a boxer, I believe, over 30 bouts professionally, and then not to include any amateur or whatever. And I just thought that Yeager would try to drag her in, use the cage and really kind of make it an ugly fight. Obviously, something Heather not used to. Smaller gloves, different footwork and all that, but it didn't seem to matter. Hardy looked really good. The few takedowns that were attempted by Yeager were dismissed with actually pretty good ease by Hardy. Obviously, her stand-up was excellent. You could tell that the power definitely transferring to mixed martial arts, and with the smaller gloves, she kept on hitting and was able to get the win there in her hometown of New York, Madison Square Garden. So that was a nice performance to kick things off. Then we saw James Gallagher against Shinzo Machida, and by the time this one started, this fight already started just about almost an hour into the 2-hour prelims, or 2-hour main card of 180, however you want to phrase that. And so there was going to be no time for what ended up being the swing bout, or the push fight, which was Nieman Gracie against Dave Marfone. That was supposed to be on Spike TV. That got pushed at the time to whenever. And James Gallagher, again, I doubted James Gallagher. I thought he'd have a tough time dealing with the karate stylings, the in-and-out movement of Shinzo Machida. I really didn't think he would be able to strike with Shinzo Machida, to be honest, but it didn't matter as he was able to get to the fight to the ground, get in a good position, hit Shinzo with some decent shots, and then he was able to get a choke in half a round. Awfully impressive. I know Shinzo's, obviously, a lot older, doesn't actually have that much MMA experience, but he's been around the game of mixed martial arts for a very long time, even though he hasn't been competing professionally that long. Boy, just super impressive for this kid. I mean, he's just 20 years old, and this was definitely his toughest test so far as a mixed martial artist in Bellator or otherwise. And, boy, he has now won all 7 of his bouts. His only win that isn't a finish, and that being a non-submission, all of his wins are by submission too, Mike Cutting, and that was his Bellator debut back in July of last year. So since then he has looked really good, and I know bantamweight, they got a very good guy at the top right now in Eduardo Dantes. I'm not saying that beating, or I'm sorry, he fights at featherweight. Man, I think because he's not a big featherweight, I think he could fight at bantamweight. But obviously I know AJ McKee has called him out, and I would like to see that fight. You got 2 prospects that are right around the same record too, both signed by Bellator. I think that's probably the fight to make next if Bellator can make that fight. I don't see that being an issue, but that to me that is what should be next for James Gallagher. And awfully messed up there. An awfully impressive performance by James Gallagher over Shinzo Machida. And then we get to the main event for the Bellator Light Heavyweight Championship, and really this fight between Ryan Bader and Phil Davis, the second time these two fighters have met inside a cage, this time in the Bellator cage instead of the octagon. And it was pretty much the same the first time. Maybe slightly a little more output, but I wasn't real thrilled by this fight. I do agree with Ryan Bader winning. I probably would have gave him 3 of the rounds, maybe 4. So I don't disagree with the judges giving him. But at the end of the day, it wasn't that great fight. I mean, once again, it was a fight where the referee had to come in and say, hey, guys, we got to pick up the action here. And just neither – I think both guys have so much respect for the other's wrestling that neither was really going to go in there and do something risky. And when you have a matchup of 2 guys with very similar skill sets, sometimes that ends up what being the difference when someone's going there and take a risk. And none of these guys really went in there and took a risk. And I think for Phil Davis, I think, like I said, I would say Phil Davis was probably losing that fight. For him to go in that 5th round, I don't know how his coaches don't say, like, you got to try something here because, who knows what the judges are going to think. Going out there and doing something reckless, I know, is not always the correct strategy, and maybe not something you always should do, and maybe not something you train. But sometimes when you're in a fight where there's not a lot of separation between you and your opponent, and you already done this once, you got to do something. You got to do something creative. You got to do something crazy. You got to go in there and take a risk. And neither guy really wanted to do that. And lo and behold, it made for a rather lackluster main event. Ryan Bader walks away with the win, becomes the Bellator Light Heavyweight Championship. And now that Bellator has seen this matchup for the first hand, I really don't think we're going to get a Bader-Davis 3, but because this is not a very deep division, we're probably going to see it at some point, because what's next for Ryan Bader is probably King Mo. Okay, that's probably what we're going to see. Now, Linton Vassell just dominated Liam McGarry, so we could possibly see a Vassell-Phil Davis rematch. I believe Vassell fought Davis. I think that might have been in the tournament that Phil Davis debuted at. I'm going to double-check that. Let's see here. Actually, no. Phil Davis has not fought Linton Vassell. He has the tournament he beat Emmanuel Newton Francis Carmon. That's right. King Mo beat Linton Vassell in that part of a tournament. For some reason, I thought he came back, but that's correct. He beat Emmanuel Newton Francis Carmon, then fought King Mo, because Liam McGarry was hurt. Then fought Liam McGarry and beat Liam McGarry, and then again losing to Ryan Bader. So yeah, I would say probably we see Phil Davis against Linton Vassell. The winner of that probably then faces the winner of King Mo against Ryan Bader, because of course Ryan Bader was the one that originally was going to fight King Mo on this very card as the main event, but then once King Mo got hurt, Phil Davis is the one that stepped in trying to get that rematch back despite being the champion. So we're to see a champion step up into the fight, probably one of the very rare instances you see that, especially within the same class. We've seen champions step up to fight, other weight classes and stuff like that, but not the same one that they're in. So that ended the Spike TV portion of the card, so we get to the pay-per-view portion of the card. Now, the pay-per-view overall, I will say, was highly entertaining, okay? I had fun. The only part that I didn't enjoy watching was the double national anthem before the main event. I've been to a lot of mixed martial arts events, and that includes Bellator, WEC, Strikeforce, UFC, some lower-level local promotions, and really, other than the local promotions, most of the bigger promotions, and Bellator is one of the bigger promotions in the world, they don't normally do national anthems. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because there's such a mix of fighters from other countries other than America, but typically don't see it. I've been to over 10 UFC fights, with my first one coming, I believe, in 2008. So it was nearly 10 years of watching the UFC and mixed martial arts and stuff like that, and I've never seen the UFC do the national anthem. So I thought that was weird. It's fine to do the national anthem. I have no problem with Bellator wanting to do the national anthem, but that should have been done at the very beginning of the event for the online streaming, not right before the main event of your pay-per-view. That's all. Because at that point, you already were pushing at 3 hours, and the fact that you added that swing bout, the Marfone and Gracie fight, to the card, despite having 3 straight fights end in the first round, that pushed things back. You were looking at a 3-hour time window, and I think that could have been handled a little better. So, anyways, besides that, really good. I was surprised to see Lima and Larkin kick off the card. I thought that would have been the Aaron Pico fight, but you started with that. And it's funny because that was probably, I hate to say the worst fight because it was a very technical fight. There definitely were some exciting moments, especially in the second round there with Douglas Lima. And then, of course, we see Lorenz Larkin switch to southpaw, and Lima, after the fight, admitting that the southpaw really messed him up, and that's why he was really tentative with striking, because he wasn't quite sure what Lorenz was going to do, and obviously not something that he probably didn't expect Lorenz to do, especially for an extended period of time. Now, however, while watching this fight and seeing Lorenz switching to southpaw, a guy that is more mainly an orthodox fighter, that left hand, the power hand, which now becomes what you're going to really be looking out for, became less of a weapon because his dominant hand was now his lead hand. And so, while it may have confused Douglas Lima, I think it maybe didn't help Larkin enough because he wasn't able to get those power strikes. The kicks were the same, but he wasn't throwing with enough frequency to really trouble Douglas Lima with the kicks, and obviously with making the power combination there of the 1-2 non-existent, he kind of lost, to me, his chance to really go in there and possibly, again, do something reckless or crazy to possibly finish Douglas Lima, and that didn't happen. So while the strategy worked in a sense, it didn't work enough to get the victory. And so I think Douglas Lima sweep those 3 rounds. Possibly you can give him a 10-8 there in round number 2, with Larkin probably taking rounds 4 and 5, and he gets the victory. For Larkin, I think this is a fight that probably will be run back at some point because it was very close. And Larkin probably I think there's those 4 welterweight fights coming up that they kept on showing. Probably is going to get the winner of one of those, I would imagine, and we're probably going to see Rory McDonald get Douglas Lima next, I would imagine, after his very dominant victory over Paul Daly earlier this year. So later this year we'll probably see that, unless I don't know how long Douglas Lima will be out. Maybe Rory wants to take a fight in between there. That's maybe he's talked about wanting to fight at 185. Maybe he fights at 185. So I don't know. We'll see. But that's probably what's next for Bellator's welterweight division. Then we saw the Aaron Pico-Zach Freeman fight, and I did call this one. This is one of the, and I did pick Douglas Lima too, but as far as like some of the newer people to this card, I did call this one right. I just thought Pico being a 20-year-old kid, having never fought a amateur or professional mixed martial arts before, against a guy who had 10 professional bouts and up a weight class. Aaron Pico was listed as a guy who has normally competed in different martial arts terms, most notably like wrestling, at 145. So taking the fight at 155 to me was kind of surprising. I don't know if that's because he didn't want to cut weight, maybe wanted to see just kind of how the process went overall, and I don't know. I just thought it was all around, bad matchup. I mean, out of all the people they could have got Aaron Pico, why did they pick a guy who was 8-2? You're telling me they couldn't have found anyone else like a 0-0, a 1-0, a 2-0, or 0-1? You know what I mean? I don't know. I just thought that was really setting up the kid for failure. I mean, I wouldn't have put a chance at 0%, but I just thought that what did happen, that's what was going to happen. That Zach Freeman was going to be able to win. Maybe not as quickly, maybe not as insanely like that, but I definitely thought Zach Freeman was a win. So it doesn't surprise me a lot. And for Aaron Pico, I think this is hard because he's a guy that has won a lot of different competitions in his life, and to go in here and given this type of stage, this type of hype, and to go out like that, I'm not saying his career's done or anything, but that's got to be very disappointing. And maybe no one's more disappointed than Bellator, because now they maybe realize, like, all right, maybe we should have got him someone that actually could have competed. Maybe we should have made him fight at 45, or maybe we shouldn't have put him on the pay-per-view card. I think they're all learning experiences, not only for Mr. Pico, but for the Bellator organization as well. And I understandably so. They're very excited about this kid, and he definitely has a bright future, but I think there's a time and a place to have a guy make his mixed martial arts debut on the pay-per-view card, and I think in this instance I don't think that was the right choice, but learn there. And I am excited for Aaron Pico. I wish him the best of luck, and I hope he bounces back from this. I just think he was put in a bad situation, that's all. Then the whole situation here with Brent Primus and Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler kind of losing his footing, rolling up his ankle. Very unfortunate. We'll probably have to see this fight run back later this year once Chandler ankle heals and everything. And I think the thing about this fight wasn't so much that that there was an injury, and I know like stuff like that happens, but I think Brent Primus, for a guy that, for all intents and purposes, and I interviewed Michael Chandler before this fight, and Michael Chandler addressed the issue, for a division that kind of needs some contenders, a guy that was kind of gifted a title shot, a guy who hadn't really been all that impressive or really had fought all that impressive of competition, despite I'll get it. Give him credit where credit's due. He did beat Derek Anderson. That's a good victory, but it was a split decision, and it was 2 years ago. He's a guy that has only fought pretty much once a year. He's only fought twice a year, once in his career, and that was in 2013, where he had back-to-back fights where he won by first-round submission. But again, against guys no one's heard of, even though they were both in Bellator. So, and he was acting like he dominated Michael Chandler. I don't get it. I don't know. I just thought that for a guy that was given a great opportunity, he didn't act very well, and that's up to him. But I didn't care for it. I think most of the crowd didn't care for it. The people that I was actually watching in a movie theater, courtesy of Phantom Events. They actually had the pay-per-view showing in a movie theater, so I was watching the theater. People that were in the theater watching with me, they didn't care for it either. So I think Brent Primus should have said, hey, look, I get it. He got hurt. I know I'm technically the champion now, but I didn't really earn this belt. And he kind of took the complete opposite and went a completely different direction with it. And that's not going to really win over any fans there. And I understand he's maybe trying to make himself known, and maybe that's what he was trying to do. But I think he went about it the wrong way, in my opinion. I wouldn't have handled it that way, and I think most people wouldn't have handled it that way, because no one really wants to win by injury, especially an injury that wasn't caused by you, I guess. It wasn't like Brent Primus had been dominating with leg kicks and now his leg's injured. Like, no, it was completely unrelated to anything that Brent Primus did inside that cage. All right, Matt Mitrione against Fedor Emelianenko. I'll admit, I got to give Mitrione a lot of credit here. I did not think he could do it, but he was able to, and I don't think it's a fluke. I mean, Matt does hit hard, and he had a chance to catch. Obviously, even though he's only a few years younger than Fedor, I would say he's the faster of the two and a little better athlete, especially at this stage in both fighters' careers. So it didn't surprise me that there was an opportunity for Mitrione to show out that athleticism, but boy, definitely went down crazy, and that's the fight game. You know, who can capitalize first? They both got rocked. Mitrione was able to capitalize off that situation quicker than Fedor and got the victory. And, you know, it's not that Fedor's bad or he's completely done. Obviously, he's not the same guy that he was, but you got to give props to Mitrione. He was able to take the punch, and it was crazy. We thought we almost saw a double knockout. They were both knockout cold, but again, Mitrione recovers. He had a great post-fight interview, talking about Tim Hague, talking about how I didn't even see the punch. I just thought all of a sudden, I say Fedor down. I'm like, oh, snap, I got to get on that. I thought it was great, and I imagine we haven't heard any news on Bellator's heavyweight division. It's made me think that for years that they were just never going to crown anybody, but I think with Mitrione doing that, making himself pretty likable in the fans' eyes, obviously being a former New York Giant football player, I think didn't hurt, but it's got to be Matt Mitrione against somebody for the Bellator Heavyweight Championship. A lot of names out there. Justin Wren is a great story. I think people really like him. I think that is a guy they like to promote. I don't know if they want to do a one-off or just simply fight for the title. Bobby Lashley obviously draws in the people that used to watch him in WWE as a former professional wrestler. So I would say it's probably going to be one of those two guys, and both are quite on a winning streak as well. And both are more of a wrestling-based fighter. We have Mitrione more of a stand-up fighter. So it's a great style matchup. And obviously I think you have great eyeballs on the product either way it goes. And Fedor's still going to be around. I don't think he's going to fight Chael. I'll get to that in a moment. But there's still fights for him to have in Bellator. I don't know how many he wants to have, how many he actually has left. But I think that he's still with it, even though he got hit by that punch. But again, Mitrione does have good power. Actually, even though Roy Nelson does have a fight booked up, I actually would like to see Roy Nelson against Fedor. I think that would probably be my most excited fight to watch as far as Bellator heavyweights, and then maybe Fedor against, going old schools, Pride rematch with Sergey Karatanov. I think those would be the two fights I'd like to see Fedor have left if he does fight again at all. And it didn't look like there was any indication that he would be retiring. I think if anything, that a loss, like again, not a fluke, but just something that happened so quickly, I think might want to get him back in there. So I think we will see Fedor again in the Bellator cage later this year. All right, the swing fight there, Nieman Gracie against Dave Marfone. Marfone, if he could stop the takedown, might have a chance to outstrike Gracie. Couldn't. Gracie kept on pushing. Finally got Marfone in a bad position. Got the rear naked choke. Gracie has pretty much done that to everybody so far in the octagon, in the cage. Actually, he's fought pretty well. I mean, he actually debuted in World Series of Fighting, submitting both them, and then I don't know if it was a contract dispute or maybe Bellator gave him another offer, but for whatever reason, he left World Series of Fighting, went to Bellator, has now gone 4-0. Probably the best guy he's beaten so far. He hasn't beat anyone like amazingly good here in Bellator's welterweight division, but I would imagine with this victory coming on the pay-per-view card and doing so rather convincingly, I'd imagine he gets a decent opponent for his next fight to see if Nieman is really for real. But, look good. Got the finish there against Marfone. All right, getting to the main event, the grud match here of Bellator NYC, Chael Sonnen against Wanderlei Silva. Does not surprise me at all that that's how the main event went down. I picked Chael Sonnen. I fully thought that he was going to be able to do exactly what he did. And Wanderlei, a guy who hasn't fought in 4 years, is now 42 years old, just wouldn't be able to stop it. And that was really the case. There was a couple moments where it looked like Wanderlei had Sonnen rocked, but Sonnen was still in it enough to get the takedown. And Wanderlei's obviously pissed, but what did you expect from Chael Sonnen? I mean, did you really expect for him to go in there and slug it out with you? I mean, come on. This is what Chael Sonnen has made a career of, taking people down, holding them there, and being really busy, not throwing a lot of hard shots. Even though in the first round, I will admit he really surprised me with the hard shots he threw. That was a different Chael Sonnen, and then more rounds 2 to 3 was more of the Chael Sonnen we've seen throughout the years between WEC and UFC, and then his post-fight speech, obviously calling out Fedor, saying that he's the one that actually submitted Tito Ortiz in 1 minute, and saying he hates New York. The hate New York part threw me off, and you could tell the crowd definitely stunned. I don't know if they knew exactly what he was going to say, but I definitely could say they didn't think he was going to say that, and that threw me off. Yeah, that's Chael being Chael. Obviously, there was the shove by Wand. Again, doesn't surprise me, but I think Wand showed that he still has some power left. I still think he probably could fight a couple more times. But yeah, just him against Chael. Just that's how it was going to go. I even think in Wanderlei's prime, maybe he could have got a finish, but as far as the game plan, it wouldn't have surprised me if Chael could have done in both their primes. So it doesn't surprise me that was the outcome. Overall, like I said, a very entertaining pay-per-view, and I thought compared to the UFC broadcast, which I'm now going to get to, I thought was way more entertaining, and I just think overall better fights. And that's just how it works. Obviously, there's going to be sometimes the UFC has better fights than Bellator when they're kind of matched up against each other, so to speak, or when they're within the same weekend. But I think this case, regardless of the pay-per-view portion of it, just the fights were overall better, and I think had a little more oomph to them as well, just overall as a whole. And maybe some of the fans that attended live would disagree with me, but I mean, at one point in the UFC pay-per-view, the UFC fight on FS1 and Fight Pass and all that, there was a string of 6 straight decisions. Overall for the card, I think there was 8 decisions out of 12 fights. Majority of the finishes, 3 of the 5 finishes for the whole entire card were on the main card, for what that's worth. And looking over the undercard real quickly, pretty dominant performance by Clay Guida over Eric Koch. I'm not surprised that Guida won, but I'm surprised it was so dominant. Obviously, Eric Koch being a little younger, a little more spry. Guida kind of looking washed up, and a guy that obviously has fought at 145 now, so you could maybe say he's not the biggest lightweight, but yeah, very dominant performance there by them. Marvin Vettori defeating Vito Miranda. Carla Esparza meeting Marina Rose, even though it wasn't the greatest fight, that's a huge win for Carla. Obviously, a win by Marina probably put herself in title contention, but a huge win for Carla, rebounding nicely after her loss to Randa Marcos. Darren Horcher defeated Devin Powell. Also saw Jared Gordon knock out Michael Quinones, if I said that correctly, in featherweight. Also, a very excellent fight between Tony Martin and Johnny Case. Tony Martin, however, was able to get the victory. And then Jeremy Kimball against Josh Stansbury. I thought there'd be a chance of a knockout, especially Josh Stansbury, but Jeremy Kimball, I think, pulling up a little bit of upset, knocking out Stansbury in the first round and getting him one of the Performance of the Night bonuses. Getting to the main card, kicked off with Dennis Siver against PJ Penn. Obviously, Penn looked a little better, but that's because, again, Dennis Siver is is the same age and also coming off a 2-year layoff from fighting in the octagon. But the biggest difference really was the variety of strikings. Siver was mixing in his kicks, not only the spin kicks, which he's known for, but the leg kicks, along with some good boxing, whereas Penn was pretty much just trying boxing, and he looked very one-dimensional. And I think that was one of the reasons why he didn't win this fight on the judges' scorecard. He was very one-dimensional. Obviously, he was definitely fading as the fight went on. I would have gave him the first round despite Siver being more active. But in the second round, that activity, again, coupled with the variety of the striking, was definitely getting the better of the former dual UFC champion. Siver kept putting on. Had a very dominant round 3. I wouldn't say a 10-8. Penn had a couple of nice strikes in there, so I wouldn't have called it a 10-8. But, yeah, I mean, if you're BJ Penn, first of all, you have nothing left to prove. I've said that many times, but he definitely has nothing left to prove. But if you're getting beat And I would say that was a pretty clear unanimous decision for Dennis Siver. If you're getting beat by Dennis Siver, who, again, was never an elite lightweight or featherweight, I'm not saying he's a horrible fighter, I'm just saying he was never at the level BJ Penn has achieved in this sport. You also have the fact that Dennis Siver hasn't fought anybody in 2 years, has had some injury problems. You really got to take a look at yourself and go, I don't think I should be doing this anymore because I'm not competing at the level I'm used to competing at, that I want to compete at, and it's just not who I am anymore, and you just can't. And the UFC really should set BJ aside. And they didn't interview him after the fight, which I thought was odd. I thought they should have, to ask him if this was the last go. I didn't hear that he is officially retired, so I don't know. Maybe he's waiting. Maybe he's thinking and processing things. But I don't think the UFC can continue to throw him out there, and shouldn't let him throw him out there. I mean, if he goes on and fights for another organization, that's on him. But as far as the UFC, I don't think they should promote his fights anymore. I mean, he's done, and like I said, he doesn't have anything left to prove. I just don't think that he should be doing anymore. And also, you got to add in health reasons. I mean, the older you get, he didn't say he's been in a lot. Yeah, he's been in a few wars, but you just don't take the hits like you used to when you're now, getting up in your 40s, and that's just a fact. So I think he's really going to have to look at that, and maybe the UFC can find him a position to stay in there. I know they got new ownership, and maybe those positions aren't maybe as freely given out, but I think that's something he can possibly do, be an ambassador for the sport, and start focusing on the next stage of his career. Obviously, a guy who's coached on The Ultimate Fighter before on 2 different occasions. Focus on coaching and training. Some of the young guys of the sport. Maybe what's next for him? I'm not sure. All right, let's get to the next fight of the evening. That was the Dirty Bird Tim Means. He took on Alex Garcia. Overall, not the greatest fight, but not the most boring fight either. And Tim Means did what I thought he was going to do. If he could keep this thing at range, and use his long frame and reach to his advantage, make sure Alex Garcia did not get in the side to land one of those big power punches, or, of course, land a takedown, then he would be fine. And he did just that, as he shut down Garcia. Garcia was 0 for 5 on his takedowns and ended up outstriking and keeping him at bay as he outstruck him 76-32, doubling, or going a little more than double, than the man from the Dominican Republic. And even though Garcia had a few moments where it looked like he maybe rattled Means was able to bounce back, keep up the pace. Obviously, he threw Garcia 186-151. And this was a nice bounce-back win for Tim Means. Obviously, fight did not go his way against Alex Oliveira in his last fight, but Alex Garcia is definitely a very young and hungry guy, and definitely has some good skills, but showed, obviously, maybe too in love with the overhand right, and obviously, maybe his conditioning, you could definitely tell he faded a little bit, especially in that third round. That was definitely all the Dirty Bird. So just a few adjustments for Garcia, work on those things. I think he can be successful for Means. Definitely a good fight, and I wouldn't say it moves him up drastically, but it definitely, I think it shows a lot for Tim Means, because his takedown defense, I think, is something that isn't great, and something that people could exploit. Obviously, you saw kind of Oliveira do that a little bit, so for him to go in there against a guy who I'd say is a pretty solid grappler, shut him down, make him fight his game, which is fighting and striking at range, he's a tough guy to beat doing that, and that showed last Sunday. All right, Dominic Reyes against Joaquin Christensen. I'll admit, I wasn't sure if the hype was real on Reyes, but if he could do what he has been doing in lower-level organizations against a guy who, solid veteran, not a guy that's, incredibly amazing, but a guy, a solid veteran who's been around, fought in the UFC, he's won in the UFC, but that didn't matter. Blasted him in 29 seconds. Awesome performance by Reyes. Really can't say much more than that. Was able to take out a tough veteran. Christensen, after, you could see when the ref called out the fight, he was kind of like, yeah, he got me. And good performance there. What can I say? Then Felice Hair against Justin Kish. Did get this one right. Obviously, there's the poop incident. I don't know exactly when that happened. Kish has kind of admitted it was her, saying, that stuff happens. So apparently she's not denying that something happened. I don't know when it happened. I don't know if it happened during the choke. I didn't notice until a fight or two later that there was kind of something brown. I was like, is that what I think it is, or is it just maybe weird color from the blood kind of, mixed on people's feet and dirt or something? I don't know, but obviously looks as though that may have been what it is. I'm not sure. I'm not going to do too much investigating on it, but regardless, this was not only a nice win for Felice Herrig to keep her streak alive, but taking on someone who is a little bigger and a little stronger than her. However, Felice is the better. She has the better technique, is the more refined mixed martial artist, and I thought that was the case coming in here because, like I said, Keish had some wins. Definitely has some talent, is undefeated. But, Felice Herrig, she was the person on the roll, coming off the biggest win in her career, defeating Alexa Grasso. I just thought it was going to be tough for Kish to really combat that, and I thought it didn't really stay standing up, but I thought standing up, the brief moments that it did, Herrig did look better. You could tell she was way faster and getting more refined on the feet, while Kish, again, very powerful, is very strong for this class. Again, doesn't have a whole lot of experience and really doesn't have a base in any one area in mixed martial arts, and I think that showed. And despite being situations where maybe she got out-muscled, Felice has been in a lot of those situations, and drilling, obviously working with a great jiu-jitsu guy in Jeff Curran. She just had the superior technique and was able to take down Keish 2 of 5 times, and then really just put the output when she had those situations, and obviously in the striking exchanges, outstriking Keish 131-50, and obviously almost won this fight with a credible submission there in the second round. And then in the third round, you could have maybe even gave her a 10-8. I mean, she outstruck her 76-7. That's ridiculous. So very good performance by Felice Herrig. Obviously, after the fight was asked who she would like next, said, I'm not going to call out anybody. Those fights don't work out. I know she probably wouldn't. She already actually fought Carla Esparza once, but those two are very good friends. I don't see that happening again. With Randa's win over her friend Carla, I wonder if we see Randa against Felice. I think those... No, Carla beat Randa on the show, but I don't think... and then Randa did beat Felice, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. She beat Tisha Torres, then beat Felice, but then lost to Carla, if memory serves me correctly. So I think that would be a very good fight to make next. Not only for a grudge match sakes and purposes, but I think for the rankings, so that I think Marcos is towards the bottom of the top 15, and Herrig, I think, was 11 coming into this fight. I don't know how much the win for Kish boosts her up, but she's probably knocking on the door of the top 10 or is at number 10. So I think that would be a worthwhile fight booked for later this year in the women's strawweight division. All right, let's get to the co-main event, Tim Boetsch against Jon Hendricks. Again, I talked about this preview, where Jon Hendricks' head is at, a guy that's missed weight at middleweight now, a guy who's, he's been fighting for a while. He's made it to the top of the hill. Guys, you got to question where his head at, and taking on a huge middleweight, and a guy with a lot of power in Tim Boetsch. I just thought this was tailor-made for what was going to happen, and maybe a little surprised it was a head kick that did in Hendricks. I didn't think that was going to be the downfall or the knockout cause, but that's what happened, and no surprise. And he kind of said, he can't really hang with the middleweights, and that's true. He's just not going to be hang with true elite middleweights. And yeah, he beat Hector Lombard, but let's be honest, Hector Lombard is an undersized middleweight. Despite being a guy that still has a lot of power at the division, he is an undersized middleweight at 5'8". That's a fact. And Jon Hendricks is an undersized middleweight at 5'9". So no surprise to me, Tim Boetsch was able to go out in there and dominate the hometown guy. And for Hendricks, I think he should seriously consider retiring, because I just don't think his head's in it anymore. I don't think he has that desire, the drive. And obviously, he's a horrible fit for 185 pounds. And he's proven that he just can't make 170. And that's fine. It's fine if someone can't make a weight class. It's fine. But when you add in the lack of desire with being in the wrong weight class, it just spells for what happened on Sunday night. And he's really going to have to take a serious look at himself. Probably, maybe even more serious than BJ Penn, because it's just clear BJ Penn shouldn't be fighting. Jon Hendricks still has some time. He's a lot younger, and still could maybe turn things around. But he really has to look at why is he doing this? Why is he getting in the cage? Is it to make money? I mean, that's great and all, but if that's your only desire, that's going to go very quickly, especially when you get your butt whooped. Because if you get your butt whooped, you don't get a win bonus. So I think he's seriously going to have to look at that. And I don't know if the UFC will cut him, but I wouldn't be surprised if we hear that coming out that they cut him, because he's not making weight at the upper weight class. And yeah, he beat Hector Lombard, but let's be honest, that was not a great fight. And then he gets knocked out by an older veteran, who's bigger than him, but again, a guy that's, never was elite, is a guy that creates fun fights, but, let's not act like Tim Boetsch is a world beater here. He just lost to simply a bigger guy, and he's really going to have to look at what he's doing in his career, because obviously right now it's not going very good for him. Getting to the main event, obviously a lot of controversy on this with the submission by Kevin Lee. There was no tap. There was no verbal submission warning. There was no checking of the arm to see if it had gone limp. Did it look like Chiesa was about to tap? Yeah, it did. But at the end of the day, when you don't see those three signs I just mentioned, when you don't see a guy go limp, when you don't hear a verbal submission, and when you don't see a guy or a verbal confirmation of submission, however you want to say that, and you don't see a tap, you can't stop the fight. Plain and simple. I know people were trying to defend Mario Yamasaki by saying, well, it looked like he was going to go out. It also looked like Justine Kish was going to go out earlier that night. Right? I mean, a lot of people have looked like they were in bad spots and have come out from it. You got to give the guy a chance to get out, especially in a situation that isn't going to cause him any bodily harm. A submission, there's no chance of Michael Chiesa walking that away worse for wear. That is 100% a fact. It's not like an arm bar where someone's arm could break, or a leg lock, or a knockout where someone's taking brain damage. Getting choked out is, while not good, you're fighting for air, but there's no pain, there's no after effects of the choke. So, other than passing out, but again, you're not dying. There's no bodily harm to you. So, you got to give the guy a chance to fight out of that situation, as dire as it may look. Now, that being said, Kevin Lee went in there. Again, I went against my hometown guy and picked against Kevin Lee. I went 4-2 overall here on the main card, but went against my better decisions and beat a guy who's not only a little bigger than him, but I would have considered coming into this fight a better grappler. Didn't look like it on Sunday night. He took it right to Michael Chiesa, got him in a bad spot, and he got him in a huge tight body lock. Chiesa could do nothing to recover. Regardless of the stoppage, it was not looking good for him. Now, Kevin Lee, after the fight, saying, it would have been 4 more rounds of that. I don't know, maybe. Maybe. It's, Kevin Lee's a guy that's never gone 5 minutes before, never gone 25 minutes before. So, I don't know if it would have been 4 more rounds of that, but it definitely wasn't looking good for Michael Chiesa. They talked about having a rematch. I think that's fine, but here's the thing. Kevin Lee wants to fight on the Detroit card, and deservingly so. And he should fight on the Detroit card. I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's just the fact that, again, they're not fighting here in Detroit until December. That's 6 months for a fight that it looked like he probably was going to win, regardless of any controversy. And I'm not trying to defend Yamasaki, but I don't know how eager I am to run that back, considering that I think there are some great matchups out there for Kevin Lee. Now, if that's the fight that they make, so be it. Personally, if I was Michael Chiesa, I would go out, fight somebody else, get a win, then fight Kevin Lee in Detroit. Because Kevin Lee's not risking fighting on Detroit. I know people are like, well, why would they wait? It's because Kevin Lee does not want to risk getting hurt, fighting somebody else, even if it's a good fight for him to move him up in the rankings, because he wants to fight in his hometown. It's just plain and simple, and I don't blame him. The guy being here in Detroit, I want to see a Detroit guy fight on the Detroit card. So I'm not blaming Kevin Lee at all for wanting to wait 6 months to fight, even though he only fought less than 5 minutes. So I get that. But for Michael Chiesa, while that sucked, again, that was his first fight in the year. Go out there, take another fight. Even if it's someone you should be, a lower-level guy, another guy in the top 15, that's fine. I don't care who it is. But I would say just go out there, book another fight here in September, and you get a win, yeah, maybe that matchup looks a lot more attractive because who knows what's going to be out there? Who knows with Khabib, Tony, Conor, how this division's, Michael Johnson, Justin Gaethje's come up, Edson Barbosa's sitting there too, so there's a lot, and obviously Anthony Pettis is fighting and returning. If he beats Jim Miller, he becomes, right back into this division. So, and who knows about Nate Diaz if he wants to fight again. So, there's a lot of stuff out there going on. So, I think for Michael Chiesa, I would just say get in there and try to get fights. And obviously with him being away, he hasn't been earning money because he's not fighting. So I would say, as much as you probably want to run it back with Kevin Lee, maybe just go out there and book another fight first. And if you get Lee in Detroit, great. Maybe you get him next year. Who knows how matchups go. But if I was Michael Chiesa, even as disappointed as you may be that the ref stopped it when he shouldn't have, I'd say they're just go out there and try to get a win on your record. That's what I'd say. And for Kevin Lee, just wait for... If it is Chiesa, that's fine, but I just say you kind of sit back, relax, keep yourself ready for any maybe possible short notice situations, but try to get yourself somebody. I think Chiesa was ranked 6 and Lee was 11, if I did that correctly. So with the win, Kevin Lee's in the top 10. Maybe Eddie Alvarez, Dustin Poirier obviously is out there. Try to get yourself a good fight. He talked about headlining Detroit. They're bringing a pay-per-view here. They're doing it at Little Caesars Arena. This is not a fight night. I'm sorry. I love Kevin Lee. He's the hometown guy, but he's not headlining the Detroit card. That's going to be a pay-per-view. The only way he's headlining is if they're giving him the title, and I don't think they're giving him the title next. So, I think he may be co-main eventing, but he certainly probably would be on the pay-per-view card of that card coming up in December. It looks like the first weekend of December. So, anyways, I am Jim Gramm. Thank you for checking out Beyond the Cage. I'd like to thank, of course, MMA Warriors here on Facebook for hosting the live stream. I also like to thank the MMA community, MMA UK, Gorilla the Bear, Top Rated MMA, AJ Hiller, MMASignaturesUSA.com, best place in the world to get mixed martial arts memorabilia, MMASignatures.co. Again, I'm Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm. Like Beyond the Cage on Facebook, Facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. Subscribe on YouTube, YouTube.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. And, of course, listen audio-wise on Google Play and iTunes. So, thank you for everybody for watching. And until next week, I am Jim Gramm, and thank you for watching another edition of Beyond the Cage.